All right, so in this project, we're going to build some expanding cards. Basically, we're going to style these panels to have a background image and a heading. We're going to use flexblocks to align everything, and then add a little bit of JavaScript so that when we click one of these, it changes the class to active, and it then expands with a CSS transition. Okay, so we'll be using JavaScript for the event listeners. We'll be using CSS transitions to give it the smooth effect. You'll see the heading doesn't come in until the card is fully expanded as well. And we're using just background images and headings, but you could make these into testimonials or FAQs or whatever it might be. So hopefully you enjoy it. Let's go ahead and jump in and get started. All right, so in this video, we're going to do the HTML and CSS for the expanding cards, and then we'll get into the JavaScript in the next video. So we have our project starter open, have my index HTML. I'm going to go ahead and change the title here to expanding cards. And then let's get rid of this H1 here. And this is going to be pretty simple. We're just going to have a container wrapped around 5 divs with the class of panel. Now for this first one, it'll have a class of panel and also a class of active, because that's how we're going to tell which card is going to be expanded. It's going to have a class of active. And inside the div is just going to be whatever the H3 is. This one is going to be explore the world. Of course, you can change that if you want. And then we're going to have an inline style for the background image. So you could easily, change that if you want. So let's say background dash image and set that to a URL and single quotes in here with a link to an image, which you could use whatever you want. I'm going to just grab a link to an Unsplash image and paste that in between the quotes here. Okay, so if I save that, I'm just going to see just the content, which is the H3 with the background image behind it, but it's only going to take up as much as the content does for now. So for the other 4 panel divs, I'm going to go right under this, still within the container, and I'm just going to paste these in. And of course, you can grab these from the project repository. And again, they're just panels with a background image in the inline style and then an H3 in the div. So wild forest, sunny beach, city on winter, mountains, clouds. So we'll save, and now we can see all the H3s with a little bit of the background image. So now let's jump into the style sheet and start to make this look, like some cards that we can expand. So the font, I'm gonna take this out and say CSS ? family and set that to MULI. And then let's add that here in the body. So that will change the font. We don't need flex direction column. And then the rest of this can stay the same for the body. Now remember, we have a container wrapped around all the panels, and all I want to do here is display this as a flex box. So immediately it's going to turn it into a flex row. Okay, so our container right here is now a flex box, so any immediate children, which are all these divs, are going to be put horizontal into a row. If we wanted them on top of each other, we could do flex direction column like that, but we don't. We want them in a row. Now it takes up 100 viewport widths right now, or 100% of the viewport. So I'm going to set the width of the container to 90 VW, which is a viewport width. So if you think of the width as 100 slices going this way, we're taking up 90 of the 100. So the next thing I want to do is the panels. So that's all we need for the container. So for the panel class, it already has the background image, but let's add some other background attributes like the size. Right now you can only see a small portion of the image. I'm going to set this to auto and 100%, and now you can see much more of the image. I'm going to set the position, so background position I'll set to center, and I don't want any repeat, so let's set the background dash repeat to no repeat. Okay, and then for the height of these, let's make them not quite the whole height of the viewport. Let's do 80 VH, so 80 viewport heights. Okay, it's starting to look a little better. Let's set the border, or not the border, but the border radius. I'm going to set that to 50 pixels, so make them rounded. And you can style it differently if you'd like. I'm going to set the color of the text inside to be white. I want a cursor pointer, so that when I hover over it, we have a cursor. Now the width, we can set the flex property since we're using flexbox. I'm going to set it to an initial value of 0.5. So they're all going to be even right now. But when we have the active class, what we'll do is we'll change this to something much higher, like flex 5. Okay. And let's separate these out a bit, so we'll add a margin of 10 pixels. And then let's make this position relative, because I want to position the H3s inside absolute. So that means that the H3 container div, which is or container element, which is the panel, has to be relative. And then when we do change the width for the active, like when we click and it turns active, I want it to not just flick to a bigger size or bigger width, but I want it to have a transition. So let's add a transition on the flex property, and we'll make it 0.7 seconds for the duration with an ease in effect. Okay, so we'll save that. Now, before we get to the active class, let's do the H3s that are inside of the panel. So we have panel H3, and I'm going to set the font size to 24 pixels. And let's set the position. So position is going to be absolute. That's why I made this relative. We want the H3 absolute within it. And I want it to be at the bottom left corner. So let's say 20 pixels from the bottom and 20 pixels from the left. If I save that, you can see the position has changed. I'm going to set margin to 0 on these. And I also only want the H3 to show if it's active, right? Because this doesn't look good. We can't even read the headings. So let's set the opacity to 0, which will just make them invisible. Okay, but when it's active, we'll show them. So let's first do the panel if it's active. So we're just saying if the panel div also has an active class, we'll change the flex from 0.5, which is the initial value, to 5. And now you can see it's much wider. For the H3, let's say panel active H3, and it has an opacity of 0 right now for every panel, but if it's active, let's set the opacity to 1. That way we can see it if it's active. Okay, now I do want to make it so if the screen is really small that we only show 3 instead of 5 of these cards. So to do that, we can add a media query by saying @media, and we can use a min or a max width. I'm going to say max width of 480 pixels. And what this means is any styles that I put in here are only going to take effect if the screen is under 480 pixels. So one thing I want to do is the container is initially set to a width of, I think it's 90 viewport widths. We're going to set it to 100 viewport widths on small screens so that it takes up a little more room and it gives us some extra space. Okay, and then I'm going to remove the last 2 panels, and the way that I can do that is by saying panel, and I can use the pseudo selector by using a colon here, and then nth dash of dash type. And I want the last 2, so there's 5 total. I want 4 and 5. So I can take nth of type 4, that's going to grab this one, but I also want the 5th one, so I'm just going to copy that, put a comma here, and let's also grab the 5th one, the last one, and let's set display to none, which will just get rid of them. So now you can see on small screens there's only 3 images, or 3 cards. If I go past 480, now there's 5. Okay, so that's what that media query does for us. I'm just going to make this a little bigger. So that should do it for the CSS. Now, obviously, we want the functionality where we click on one of these and it expands, and the other one gets smaller, and we can see whichever one is active. So for that, we need JavaScript. So that's what we're going to do in the next video. Okay, so now we want to get into the JavaScript, which is actually going to be fairly simple. And I plan on this being one of the first projects, at least in the first 10. So I'm going to explain kind of stuff that many of you might already know. Now, remember the whole thing, what we need to do is just change the class really on each of these. So the first one has a class of active right now. If I put that class on the second one just manually by typing it in here, it's going to show the second one. So I'm going to start with that on the first like I had, but we want to be able to switch that in our JavaScript. So we need to first bring in all of these panels into our JavaScript files. So I'm going to create a variable called panels. And there's different ways to select elements. We can use, get element by ID. We can use query selector. So what query selector does is allows us to select anything. It could be, a paragraph, an H1, a class, an ID, whatever. We want the panels, which have a class of panel. Now the problem here is there's more than one panel, right? We have all these divs with panels. So we can't just do this, or it's just going to select the first one. So we need to use query selector all in that case. And with query selector all, instead of just selecting the element directly, it puts all of the panels into what's called a node list, which is similar to an array. In fact, I can show you that. If I console log here panels, and we open up our Chrome DevTools here, you'll see that it prints out this node list with each div and some properties. And I can target specific panels, like if I put 0 in here, because arrays are 0 index, it's going to give me the very first panel. You can see it has the class of active. So I could get the second one with 1, and so on. Now you can also loop through a node list just like you can with an array, and that's what I want to do. I want to take my panels and use a for each, which is a high order array method, and these methods take in a function as an argument. So you could do function, or what you usually see is an arrow function like this. Okay, and then we need to pass in here whatever we want to use for each iteration. These are panels, so I'm going to use panel, singular. And I can console log here, panel, and it's just going to loop through and show me each panel. Now, what do we actually want to do here? We want to have an event listener on each of these so that if we click it, something happens. So we'll take each panel and say add event listener, and I want to listen for a click. And when that click happens, we're going to run a function. And for that function, let's just do a console log here, and I'll just say, I don't know, 1, 2, 3. And if I click on any of these, we're going to log 1, 2, 3. So I want to, whatever one we click on, I want to add a class of active. So if I say panel.classList, that gives me a list of the classes. But we also have methods on this class list object like add, where we can specifically add a class. And I'm going to add a class of active. So now, let me just close this. If I click on this one, it gets added the class of active, which then changes it to flex 5. If I click on this one, same thing, but you can see that active is still on these other ones. So it's expanding them, but it's not retracting the other ones. So what we'll do is before we put a class of active, let's remove the class of active on all of the other ones. So I'm going to have a function here called remove active classes. And we'll create that down here. Say function remove active classes. Now, since there's more than one panel, we're going to loop through them and then remove all the active classes. So we're going to do just what we did above. So panel.forEach, and in here we'll put an arrow function. Now, when you have an arrow function with just one argument like this, because we can also get the index, we can get the complete array, but since we only need this one panel, we don't even need these these parentheses. We can just do this. All right, and up here we can do the same thing. I mean, you can keep them if you want, but you don't have to. And then in here, let's say for the particular panel that we're looping through, we want on the class list object, we want to call remove, and we want to remove all the active classes. Oops. Okay, so now what's going to happen is when we click, it's going to remove all the active classes from all of them and then put the active class on the one we click. So if I click here, looks like I messed something up. Panel is not defined. Oh, panels. So we're looping through panels here, which is coming from here. All right, so if I click on this, now you'll see we get the effect that we want, because right before it adds the active class to this, it takes it off the rest of them. Now, one thing I would like to change though is as soon as I click on this, you'll see the H3 and it has that kind of weird falling down effect. So let's add a transition to the opacity on the H3. So I'm going to go to the active H3 and let's add a transition here, and let's say opacity. So we want to add a transition on the opacity 0.3 seconds and ease in. And let's add a delay as well. So we'll add 0.4 seconds on the delay. And now if I click, you see that it doesn't actually fade in until the card is fully expanded, which is a lot smoother than how it was before. Okay, so that's pretty much it, guys. I mean, you can make these into any kind of card. It doesn't have to be just a heading with a background image. It could be like a testimonial or absolutely anything you want. So hopefully this helps you in building further projects with little widgets like this.